Hello class. We are going to begin the PowerPoint on Neoclassicism. For homework, I need you to have your Neoclassicism Founding Fathers worksheet out in front of you and fill that in for your notes as we go along. Feel free to pause this presentation anytime or to review it. So let's get started. Let's first of all look at Neoclassicism, break it down. What does this root mean? It means new. And then we think of something as being classic. Usually it's something that's old. Think classical music, for example, or hey, that's classic. It's just something that's been around for a long time. So this is something, it's new but classical at the same time. This is the name that's given to the Western movement in decorative visual arts and literature, in music and architecture, and it draws inspiration from the classical art and culture of ancient Greece or ancient Rome. The main neoclassical movement coincided with the 18th century Age of Enlightenment. You learn about this on page 151 in your textbook. And it continues into the early 19th century. Later in the century, it competes with Romanticism, which we're going to talk about later. However, in architecture, the neoclassical style continues throughout the 19th, 20th, and even 21st century. You will get to see this firsthand when you're in Washington, D.C. You'll see a lot of neoclassical architecture, especially at the museum, Smithsonian. Our founding fathers sort of emerged out of this movement. And the founding fathers, this group, can usually be divided. There was sort of a split between the Puritans, who we've already studied. We've already looked at some of the history and the culture and the literature of the Puritans. Remember, simple, straightforward, spiritual writing. Jonathan Edwards, we had Anne Bradstreet, Edward Taylor. So if you could recall the type of works we read from them. That's a good example of Puritan literature. Now there was a split between the Puritans and then the upcoming deists, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment. Okay, as I mentioned before, my definition of Neoclassicism, it emerged at the same time with the Age of Enlightenment, or it's also known as the Age of Reason. Okay, during this time, new scientific discoveries from Galileo, Copernicus, and 17th century scientists like René Descartes and Isaac Newton. These kind of discoveries in philosophical thinking challenged the role of faith, and it established an either-or mentality between men of reason and men of faith. So you see a split. You were either a man of reason or a man of faith. I'm going to read the first paragraph from the chapter titled The Enlightenment Challenge on page 151 of your textbook. I think this is a good time to insert this information. Drawing from the discoveries of Galileo, Copernicus, and the 17th century scientists René Descartes and Isaac Newton, Enlightenment thinkers in Britain and in Europe argued that the universe was governed by natural laws that people could understand and apply to their own advantage. John Locke, for example, articulated a philosophy of reason in proposing that the state existed to provide for the happiness and security of individuals who were endowed with inalienable rights to life, liberty, and property. Those words should sound very familiar. You're going to come across them in the Declaration of Independence. You will see that Thomas Jefferson was very influenced by the Enlightenment. Enlightenment writers emphasized rationality, harmony, and order, themes that stood in stark contrast to folk culture's traditional emphasis on the unfathomable mysteries of God and nature and the inevitability of human failure and disorder. So again, you're going to see a contrast between these new men of reason versus the traditional men of faith. Which moves us into what is deism. Deism comes from the Latin word deus, which means God. Okay, deism was the dominant philosophy among the educated classes in Europe and America. Deists believed that human reason was capable of solving social and political problems. They believed that there was a supreme being, or God, who operates only through natural laws. Therefore, there was no belief in the supernatural. For example, they did not accept Jesus as the Son of God, because that would mean believing in the virgin birth. Since that doesn't operate through a natural law, that was considered supernatural, and that was not believed. So our founding fathers, the Neoclassicists, were talking about a time somewhere between 1750 and 1820. Look at the dates, see if you see anything within that time that looks familiar, and take a look at the picture in the background. You see that looks like the signing of the Declaration of Independence with Thomas Jefferson right here, the author. Basically, the literature of this time and the thinking of this time emphasized reason, harmony, and restraint in both oral and written communication. Some of the founding fathers were considered deists. Some had more traditional views, similar to the Puritans. Revolutionary period literature. The fourth and fifth generation Americans were happily living as English subjects until, I apologize, there's a mistake here, King George III, that should be 3, imposes regulations that threaten the liberties of the colonists. The mind of the nation is now on politics, and this is reflected in the literature produced. Now, during this time, we still don't have novels or plays or short stories of any importance. Think back on the Puritan literature. It was mostly poetry, biographies, autobiographies, journals, narratives, with a real spiritual focus. Now, the focus is in revolutionary period literature is public political writing. So unlike the personal writing of the Puritans, the Revolutionary period produced public political writing. Remember, the mind of the nation is just kind of surrounded by this turmoil and these problems they're having with England. During this time, nearly 30 newspapers and almanacs were popular in all the colonies. So a lot of publishing companies, especially in Boston, newspapers were being circulated. Again, we're looking at nonfiction writing. And much that is known about private life in this period comes from letters. So still a lot of letter writing. Okay, we're going to look at one particular author, Benjamin Franklin. He was a leading author, a political theorist, politician, printer, scientist, inventor, civic activist, and diplomat. This man wore many hats. You could see there is a lovely portrait of him here on the slide, and I believe he's wearing bifocals, which is something he had invented. He worked as a printer from his early teens until retirement at the early age of 42. He devoted himself to science, inventing the bifocals, as I had pointed out, the lightning rod, and the Franklin stove. He was best known as a statesman and diplomat. He played an important role in the drafting of the Declaration of Independence, which we'll be taking a close look at. He was also ambassador to England and France. Okay, he's most famous for publishing the Poor Richard's Almanac from 1732 to 1757. It was an ongoing publication. What is an almanac? An almanac is a publication containing information, observations, and advice, usually in regards to the weather, health issues, or farming. It would give information to farmers, for example, what crops to plant, what time of year, what time to harvest them, what time to sow the seeds, etc. Franklin's almanac was especially popular because of the aphorisms he included. An aphorism is a terse or short-worded saying embodying a general truth. Take, for example, the early bird gets the worm. That's a short saying, terse saying, which does embody a general truth. Think Black Friday, right? That's coming up soon, where people start lining up early at the doors, 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning, to get the best sales that are out there. If you are at the front when that door opens, you'll probably be able to grab the sale item that you're looking for. He published the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin in 1771, and we will be looking closely at this work later. So to wrap it up, basic differences and similarities between the Puritans and the Founding Fathers. Okay, for Puritans, they were Christian. They wrote in a plain Puritan style. Remember, their writing wasn't meant to be confusing. It wasn't highly decorative or ornate. It was meant to be very straightforward and understood. A lot of their literature was personal, devotional, again with a spiritual focus. The Founding Fathers, many of them were deists. They wrote in that neoclassic style, again, which emphasized reason, harmony, and restraint. A lot of the literature produced during this time had a political focus because of the imminent war with England, the Revolutionary War. What did they have in common? Both groups of thinkers, writers, believed in community, strong sense of community and family. They were intellectual thinkers. And they're really the people who shaped early America and much of the literature, the arts, and the culture that follows.